We gather today to honor our grief, our mourning, our memories, and the lives of those who have died. Those we knew personally, our families of birth, our families of choice, strangers, other humans, other lives. The devastation brought by climate change, the devastation that brings climate change, war, disease, hunger, and so much that there is to grieve. Complicated grief for people who were maybe not all that we had hoped they would be in life. Complicated grief for people we loved dearly who left too soon. Love of parents and siblings, and sometimes children who go before us. There is a lot to grieve in the world. Grief and mourning have been much on my mind this month. It is that season, and grief has shown up close to home for me and for others in our community. Grief has been part of the life of our staff this month, part of my own life this month, part of your lives this month. I want to take just a little minute, personal privilege, if you will, to talk about my cousin, Jamie Messenger Gordon, who died at the beginning of this month. She was 49 years old. When I was born, she was 13. And I have 3 cousins who were born the same year, Jamie, Tammy, and Jera. And when I was a little kid, they thought I was a doll. If you've ever seen pictures of me as a small child, I was very, very cute. And they loved to dress me up, take me places. And Jamie had a hard combination of factors playing into her life. When she was 16, she was driving a car that another one of our cousins was in, and someone grabbed the steering wheel as a joke, and the car spun out and slammed into a tree, causing the death of our cousin Jason, who was just 14 at the time. That is the first memory I can place on a timeline that I know is my own memory. It made going home for Jamie's funeral a really intense experience. You see, the funeral home is across the street from my grandparents' house. And so I learned to ride my bike in the parking lot at the funeral home. My first memory starts in the funeral home. Every room in that building is layered with times I've been there to grieve. And while I was there for Jamie's funeral, I kept waiting for Jamie to show up, to laugh and give me a hug, to remember someone with a lot of joy. One of the things I love about our traditions of grief, the way an ethical culture funeral or memorial service is carried out, is that we focus on the memories. We focus on what we can choose to hold on to from our loved ones. Complicated though they almost always are. what we can take with us and increase ourselves with. I've been trying to hold on to Jamie's joy. I don't think I ever encountered her not laughing. And on top of that car accident, as a teenager, she lost her husband when he was 33. One time her house burned down. It was a life. It was a rough life at times. And she could always find something she wanted to smile about. She always found that as long as there was another day, there was something worth doing. In the introduction to the edited collection, Rebellious Mourning, The Collective Work of Grief, Cindy Milstein writes, "We are at present swimming in a sea of grief." I feel that way. I can't watch the news without deep, painful grief. And nothing feels or, in fact, is isolated, right? The energy that goes into bombs that kill people one place makes the climate worse and the hurricane worse for people somewhere else, and it is all one grief, actually. The things that caused the health condition that ended my cousin's life are part of systems that create outcomes. And the outcomes that the systems create are their purpose. Cindy Milstein continues, "I come to this anthology through my own pain, yet it is inseparable from the pain of this world. I have traversed the worst, sometimes deftly, oftentimes not. Sometimes with others, too frequently alone. This pain laid bare much cruelty, some of it systemic, some of it due to socialization. One of the cruelest affronts, though, was the expectation that pain should be hidden away, buried, privatized. A lie manufactured so as to mask and uphold the social order that produces our many unnecessary losses. When we instead open ourselves to the bonds of loss and pain, we lessen what harms us. We reassert life and its beauty. We open ourselves to the bonds of love, expansively understood. Crucially, we have a way together to at once grieve more qualitatively and struggle to undo the deadening and deadly structures intent on destroying us. Cracks appear in the wall. I think often that much of what scares us about grief is those cracks. Because they're not just in the wall, they're in you too. Someone dies. Many people die. Something breaks on the inside. We talk about it as heartbreak, but it feels often more like self-break. Like, now I don't know who I am because this person is not here for me to be in relationship with anymore. Because this thing has happened that is a hallmark of how far we've gone. Because we are made of our relationships with one another. We are constructed out of knowing and being known by other people. And when someone is suddenly absent, and it's sudden even if you had a long time to get ready for it, When someone is suddenly absent or somewhere is suddenly absent, we do have to remake ourselves. We do have to become someone new and not through our own choice. We try to stop it a lot of the time. The cultural norm in the United States is to go to some sort of memorial service and then put it away. I have never experienced a grief that could be put away so quickly. I have experienced a lot of grief. I have experienced a lot of death. The funeral home across the street from my grandparents' house meant that often enough my grandma would open the blinds and see cars and then call to find out who had died. It's a pretty small town and she had been there forever, so more often than not we knew them. And I kept a funeral dress at my grandparents' house for such an occasion. I only recently learned that not everybody, as a necessity of life, has funeral clothes. I have always had funeral clothes. When I worked as a chaplain in a hospital in Burbank, California, I had the opportunity to talk with a lot of people about death. But I have this one specific memory that sticks with me that created a core of how I think about death and grief and continuing to live when other people don't. I had a patient whose spouse had died nearly 30 years prior. This patient was pretty ill of their own accord, but was very focused on that they had never really lived. They had made all these plans with their partner, what they were going to do when they retired, what they were going to do, and then that future simply wasn't there, and for 30 years, this person had been living in the absence of what could have been. It felt wrong for them to make a new plan. It felt wrong for them to do anything but be sad about this beautiful life that they didn't get to live. They talked about it as if they had the most beautiful and perfect teacup. And they had loved this teacup. And then they didn't know what happened, but it had wound up on the floor in pieces. And all they could figure out how to do was scoop up the pieces of the teacup and cry over them. We talked about the teacup, about what they had planned and what they had hoped for, about the things that it was genuinely too late for at that point. And I held their hand and we cried together, because that's what you do. And then I said, well, I know it can't be a teacup anymore. There's no amount of gold inlay that would turn this slightly powdered teacup back into a teacup. But could it be a mosaic? Could the broken up pieces of a life you once dreamed about turn into a beautiful picture of something else? Could you add stuff to it? Could you find other people with other broken pieces and make together a picture of something else? They agreed. They said that they would try, and then I never saw them again, which is the unfortunate reality of life in a hospital. I don't know what they did with this conversation, but I know what I did. I know that this is so much of how I think about self-break, about grief, about what it means to mourn together. Loss can feel shattering, often feels shattering. Like you had something beautiful and you at least knew what to do with it, whether or not it was perfect. And now you don't know what to do. If you stay busy trying to rebuild your teacup, which will never be a teacup again, not only do you do yourself a disservice, and let me be clear, that is a deep disservice you do to yourself, but you do a disservice to the rest of us, too. Because when we let ourselves break open, right, when we don't rush to patch the places where we feel broken, but we find places where other people's brokenness fits into a bigger picture together, where we can be in community around grief, well, then our broken teacups aren't just our broken teacups. They're a picture of a world remade by love. Grief often is love that no longer has somewhere to go. Love that you have for someone that you can no longer give to them because they and their body are not around anymore. You can do a lot of things with that love. When Caitlin and I visit Ohio, we go to the cemetery where my dad's parents are buried, and then the cemetery where my mom's parents and my cousin Jason and his dad, my cousin Jamie and her husband are buried. And I sit down on my grandparents' graves and I talk to them. I don't think they're there any more than they are everywhere else or anywhere at all. But there is such a symbol of them. Talking to them lets me put the love somewhere and reminds me that I can't keep it all just for them. Because at the end of the day, nobody responds to me at their graves. At the end of the day, if they do, it is only my memory of my grandmother saying, "You get as many breaths as you get, and then it's over, and that's okay." Which is what she said to me at every funeral we ever went to together. I remember that the love that I have that is for my cousin and my grandparents and countless other people who I have known and haven't known. People who were my blood and people who were my choice and people who I never met, but influenced how I think so much that I can't help but call them ancestor. That love does have somewhere to go. That if I patch myself up and stay in myself, I miss the place of connection that is open-hearted love and grief together. This month, Gustavo Gutierrez died. That name probably doesn't mean anything to you unless you happen to be a theology nerd. Gustavo Gutierrez was a Peruvian philosopher, Catholic theologian, and Dominican priest who was one of the founders of liberation theology in Latin America. I don't theologically agree with Catholics about almost anything. Liberation theology, however, gets me. Broadly speaking, liberation theology takes the traditional, very hierarchical system of Catholicism and says Actually, the people you think are on the bottom are the most important. Gutierrez wrote in his really important work, A Theology of Liberation, if there is no friendship with the poor and no sharing in the life of the poor, then there is no authentic commitment to liberation, because love exists only among equals. We are all very equal in heartbreak. You can have all of the resources in the world. You could be the richest, most special boy on the planet. And your heart will still break. You cannot actually be free from grief. You could do things to lessen the unnecessary grief that many people experience because of the way our society is structured. But you cannot escape that you will hurt sometimes. Gutierrez also wrote, the poor person does not exist as an inescapable fact of destiny. Their existence is not politically neutral, and it is not ethically innocent. The poor are a byproduct of the system in which we live and for which we are responsible. They are marginalized by our social and cultural world. They are the oppressed, exploited proletariat, robbed of the fruit of their labor and despoiled of their humanity. Hence, the poverty of the poor is not a call to generous relief action, but a demand that we go and build a different social order. In 2023, at least 90 of our unhoused neighbors died on the streets. That's just here in DC. The poverty of the poor is not a call to generous relief action, but a demand that we go and build a different social order. Because if our hearts break, and they do, if you have ever been heartbroken, you are able to be equals with the poor. If you have ever suffered loss, you know how to empathize with someone who has lost everything. It might take some practice. We get really good at building up the walls around our pain, turning discomfort into rejection, becoming spiky so that nobody can see how soft we are on the inside. Me too, I'm calling myself out there. We're here today to honor our own losses, our own grief and mourning, which are big and difficult things. But as we grieve, as we mourn, may we let our mourning be rebellious. May we let it break us open in the way that helps us see our shared humanity, our shared aliveness, with everyone, but especially with those people who are dehumanized by our society. Let us not seek to aid people we think are more broken than us, when much of the break is one that we share. Let us be healed in a way that calls us to healing. Let us choose to be together with one another and then practice being humbly together with all those who walk this earth with us. May we dedicate ourselves to a world where nobody dies on the street of our nation's capital, where nobody dies on the street anywhere, where those who want homes have them and everyone has access to the health care that they need, and where care for alcoholism and drug addiction are readily available and not punitive or judgmental, where mental health care services are available and kind enough that people do not feel the need to take them out of this world quite so quickly, take themselves out of this world quite so quickly. May we work for a world where officers of our government do not kill our fellow citizens or anyone at all, where we produce less grief and more care, more togetherness, more of the wholeness of hearts which have been broken again and again and again. May it be so. Thank you.